Today, on StoryCube, a special episode, Troc Rime, we welcome a leading figure of the bar, a man who has defended some of the darkest cases in France, Gilbert Collard, lawyer. For decades, he stood in courtrooms, facing judges, facing jurors. The most complex cases in France, crimes that shocked the nation, cases under media pressure, trials where the truth is never simple. The Carpentras case, a desecration of Jewish cemeteries that set the country ablaze, an investigation under political pressure, and a truth that would never be the one people expected. The Solar Temple, 53 dead, a collective end, a massacre orchestrated behind the flames, the bodies, a cult, a guru, and questions that remain unanswered. The Morjoux case involved a young woman assaulted in the Calanques of Marseille. This miscarriage of justice shattered lives and sparked a years-long fight for the truth. Tonight, Gilbert Collard opens his most memorable case files, cases he will never forget, trials that have haunted him, and what it's really like to defend those whom everyone has already condemned, because in court, the truth is never what you think it is. Make yourself comfortable, turn off the lights, and get ready to dive behind the scenes of justice. This is where destinies are decided and where the defense is the last barrier between a man and the abyss. Welcome to StoryCube.
Hello everyone, today on StoryCube we're welcoming Gilbert Collard. So Gilbert is one of the most prominent criminal lawyers at the bar. Welcome to StoryCube. He has experienced some absolutely incredible stories, and today I thought it would be interesting to have him on StoryCube so he can tell us about the biggest cases he has handled. He recently wrote a book, which I'm holding. It's one of the foundations of a memoir. Before we start the show, would you like to briefly tell us what it's about?
I don't know if you've ever been to a boarding school in your life. No, probably not. You don't look like someone who would go to a boarding school. No, for example, well, it's a bit like if I had gone to a boarding school with the men and women who would want to open the doors of that boarding school, to listen to my confession about the horrors I have seen and encountered throughout my life. Because at some point you have no choice. If you are lucky enough to be able to write, if you are lucky enough to be able to speak, to express the depth, the complexity, the unimaginable nature of the criminal act, I wanted ears to hear, eyes to see the horrors that I heard and that I saw.
There is a case that is huge, which you also talk about in the book. The Gold of the Solar Tomb. Maybe for those who don't necessarily know, what is this story of the Gold of the Solar Tomb after all?
It's the story of a cult called the Solar Temple cult, which was created by a man named Dimambro and assisted by another man named Jouret. Both of them managed to recruit men and women into their mystical Templar-like delusion who would go as far as this subject, to make the journey to the planet Sirius.
The Solar Temple, October 5, 1994 before dawn, Sherry, Switzerland, a burning farmhouse, 23 bodies wrapped in ceremonial capes. At the same time, a foul wind in Valais, a chalet in flames, 25 bodies in Quebec, 5 more dead in Maureen Heights, 53 victims in a single night. The Order of the Solar Temple, an esoteric sect founded by Luc Jouret and Joseph Dimambro, anarchists, visionaries, victims, some bodies riddled with bullets, their hands completely tied, others arranged in star shapes as if for some kind of ritual, sleeping pills, opioids found near the bodies, candies and stuffed animals near the children. The gurus promised a journey to Sirius, a better world after the apocalypse. 74 victims in total between 1994 and 1997. Willing followers or disguised executions. In a mystical departure, the truth will never be established.
It's a very mysterious case that sends chills down our spines as we enter the shadowy sect of the Solar Temple. We witness black masses, we witness orgiastic rituals, we witness exorcisms, we witness the mystical conception of a child. All of this takes place against a backdrop of arms trafficking and money laundering. And we see lawyers, architects, doctors, people who at first glance join this sect.
So it's not necessarily just anyone?
No, it's not just anyone. There aren't idiots. I mean, you can be an architect, a lawyer, and still be an idiot. But what I mean is we're not dealing with mentally deficient people, okay? And all these people let themselves be regimented and live by the rhythm of the sect, with the rules of the sect. There are masses. I'm describing this unimaginable scene where Luc Jouret, who is a doctor, a homeopath, a former paratrooper, one of the 2 founders of the sect I'm talking about. Now, I apologize to sensitive viewers, but this is actually one of the least violent scenes among all the ones I'm describing. He performs masses, he's naked under his cassock, and he gives what he calls the spermatic communion, which means he gets oral sex from a man or a woman. He's not sectarian for someone leading a sect. he ejaculates into the mouth, either of the man or the woman who is supposed to receive the communion. That means the semen in the mouth of all the members of the sect who are there. This is one of the scenes, among many others, that really happened, which was reported at the trial and confirmed. This is not something I made up. It's really a scene that's in the case file. It was proven. It's one scene among many others. For example, when there's a wedding, Luc Jouret, who claims to be the descendant of the Grand Master of the Templars, so he is the reincarnation of the Grand Master of the Templars. Before celebrating the wedding, sleeps with the bride to purify her. But you have lawyers, doctors, architects, women, even well-known men, accountants who accept this, who believe in it.
And how do they do it to make sure that then...
Again, I apologize, but if I have to get into that, it would take me 3 days. You have to read the book because it's all about the mechanism of psychological control. Maybe an uncle who won't tell you anything, but what made Rasputin so powerful that the Tsarina was completely under his control? It's the magnetic power of someone. It's that kind of energy of conviction that others don't have. And that's what makes people follow them, listen to them. So, what is the psychology of men and women? They join the sect and they will perform all the rituals of the sect. For example, a member of the Solar Temple sect would not have sat on this chair without cleaning it with alcohol. All the food was cleaned with alcohol and so on. There was the celestial child who was said to have been conceived with the help of a sword. In reality, it was later learned that the sword was connected to a battery and that the child was the result of a completely normal relationship. But the celestial child wore a helmet, well, so as not to hurt his head. And this excrement was used as fertilizer. It brought a supernatural dimension to the food.
Collected the excrement.
Yes, but all this will still lead, let's not forget, to horrible crimes, to horrible murders. We will find in Switzerland, we will find in France, we will find in Canada, corpses arranged in the shape of stars. Especially in Canada, there will be the murder of a child, his father, and his mother, and he will have a stake driven into his heart. So there is a whole satanic ritual around it. Well, you know, it's so complicated that if we had to talk about the Solar Temple, I would need 3 hours of airtime.
How could it have spread to multiple countries?
Because they had branches everywhere. They traveled, they moved around. Luc Jouret went to Canada, Dimambro went to Belgium, he went to Switzerland, he went to France. Members were recruited during conferences. There were conferences with an esoteric focus, sometimes also oriented towards medicine, alternative medicine. And then very quickly, the conferences shifted towards communication with the afterlife. Okay? Dimambro regularly reported to the members of the sect about the communications he had with the high priest Jacques de Molay from the Order of the Temple, who was burned alive on the orders of Philip the Fair. He was fortunate to be in communication with him, so he reported the orders that the Grand Master de Molay gave to the members of the sect. Also, it's important to know that most of the members had a lot of money and the sect was very wealthy. In fact, Dimambro and Jouret were very wealthy and lived a very luxurious life in palaces, with beautiful cars, on beautiful trips. Well, there was also a financial aspect to it. But all of this ends in a cataclysm of murder, even intrigue, because some victims will have 2 bullets in the head, so one too many.
Completeness too many, so he took a bullet, and that's our starting point.
If you take a bullet to the head, my friend, I doubt you could survive another.
So in that case, someone else must have shot him.
Well, yes, that's it. Yes, that's right. And the investigation never solved it. Yes, never.
Did you get involved in this case or not really?
I got involved from the beginning as the lawyer for one of the C's, a priest, who asked me to defend the family's interests. Of 3 victims, a little boy, his father, and his mother. The father was a poet, and the priest I had met was a painter, and he had made drawings to illustrate the collection of poems. And in the book there was an afterword by Luc Jouret, and the priest had met Luc Jouret. And he told me, what I will never forgive myself for is having met the devil and not seeing him, because he had truly met the devil.
When you represent victims like this, what are you actually pleading against? Are you filing a complaint against something?
No, but in this case, since there's no one to arrest, yes, that's it in the end, we get killed. Yes, there was a survivor who was a great conductor named Tabachnik, who was a member of the sect. And the justice system rushed to blame him, even though clearly he had nothing to do with it, absolutely nothing. Except that his ex-wife, who had probably been Jure's mistress, also conned herself. But he had nothing to do with it. But since there had to be a trial, he was accused of being an accomplice. He was acquitted. But it allowed us to have another trial, a trial under incredible circumstances, I mean. Since it was a trial that attracted the press from all over the world, and there were no suitable rooms, they couldn't find anything better than to organize the trial. In an old library, you could have said it was straight out of the Da Vinci Code. There were zodiac signs on the ceiling. Yes, there were planets all along the wall, while all the victims died to go to the planet Sirius. It felt like they had recreated in that courtroom a kind of phantasmagoria of the cult. It's mind-blowing.
And so you talk about several cases in the book, for example. That's right, I see there's Judge Michel, for example. What's that about?
Judge Michel is a magistrate who arrived in Marseille in 1981. He wasn't originally trained as a magistrate since he had studied to become a natural sciences teacher, but by chance during his studies he became a magistrate and then an investigating judge. And then he tackled what we would call drug trafficking today. At the time it was the French Connection, meaning the major drug trafficking network. Was Marseille the capital of drug trafficking? The best chemist, as I mentioned in the book, was a Marseillais in the 1930s. He has an entire chapter dedicated to him. About Marseille. Yes, because Marseille is dangerous, and Judge Michel won't understand it, which will cause his death. Besides, there was even some drugs that carried this chemist's stamp. And do you know how he became such an extraordinary chemist? By tinkering with pastis, by trying to reproduce the taste of pastis without buying it, obviously to pay less for it. He had worked so much on chemistry that he became one of the best drug chemists. He perpetuated a kind of know-how, like what you find among cabinet makers. There you have it. The Marseille drug trade continued for years under Carbon, Spirituo, and the Guerini brothers. And Judge Michel, when he arrived in Marseille, was tasked, among other things, with eradicating drug trafficking. That was the great titanic battle between this judge and drug trafficking. Well, but I can't tell you all about it. You have to read the book. It's too long, right? Then it brings us in. How could I explain this to you? You know, you have to, page after page, walk through, retrace the alleys of Marseille at night, go inside the nightclubs, push open the doors of shady restaurants, retrace the gambling halls, accompany the police when they go on stakeouts. You have to follow Zampa, you have to follow the one they nicknamed the Prophet, whom I was the lawyer for. There was a movie, about Jackie Imbert, who was shot at, I think, 15 or 20 times with a revolver. And he was able to see those murderers because they thought he was dead. And they took off their hoods, but he wasn't dead. And so after that, there was a series of revenge killings. All of that is told in the movie, The Prophet. That's what I'm talking about. So Michel is in there, and well, he's going to get killed. For reasons that I explain in the book, which still remain quite elusive. But everyone does their own investigation when reading the book. Everyone does their own investigation.
You investigated his death precisely, but
I defended one of the killers, so naturally I investigated his death. I was the lawyer for the one who was driving the motorcycle, but who claimed not to know he was killing, a judge. The killer and he pleaded before the criminal court that they didn't know the target was a judge, so there was a mistake about the person. Well, it was really a judge who died, right?
How did it happen? They got on the motorcycle, then No.
There's the motorcycle, him. When the judge left the courthouse, the killers who were keeping watch started up behind him, went up Breteuil Street, and then at one point the judge, on his little motorcycle, turned right to go toward his home. He stopped at a stop sign next to a prostitute who witnessed the scene. And then the motorcycle approached slowly. It stopped at the stop sign. A man got off, pulled out his gun, and fired 2 shots, one in the shoulder and one in the head. He got back on the motorcycle, which drove away. A driver who was there, braver than the others, tried to follow the motorcycle. At one point, the motorcycle stopped. One of the passengers got off the motorcycle, pulled out his gun, calmly and slowly walked toward the driver and pointed his gun at the windshield and said, "Go away." The guy left. Yes.
The guy left. So they were found as a result?
I imagine. They were found in an extraordinary way. I learned about the judge's murder live. I learned about it because I was at the courthouse restaurant. And I saw Mrs. Albertini, the duty prosecutor, go answer the phone. I saw her come back pale, ashen, crying. Obviously, we all wondered what was happening. She immediately said, "They killed Pierre," that's his first name, and the news spread, so we knew right away. So the investigation started, of course, right away, and the police had nothing, not the slightest clue, not the slightest piece of evidence, nothing, just a corpse. And then a harmless, ordinary person, never underestimate the ordinary. All criminal solutions come from the ordinary. It's the ordinary that is fatal for the murderer. An individual in his condominium is exasperated by a motorcycle that's parked there in the parking lot. For several days, for 2 days, he has been notifying the impound services to have this motorcycle towed, and here there's something incomprehensible even for me. Right away, from the moment this motorcycle is spotted, now I should mention it's very close to the scene of the crime. From the moment this motorcycle is spotted, we're about 250 to 300 meters from the scene of the crime. The criminal police make the connection between the red motorcycle. The murderer's motorcycle was reported as red. It's the same brand, so it's the murderer's motorcycle. And from there, from this motorcycle, which won't reveal anything for months and months, one day, an inspector looks at the motorcycle and discovers a clue that will help solve the crime.
What does he discover? Well, there's the book. That's it. I was in it. Okay, so he finally discovers on the motorcycle a way to find them.
So it's extraordinary because this detail that he's going to discover, at first, it seems unusable. Yes, it seems unusable. Because it will take 3 weeks of work to get this detail to reveal anything. Finally, on December 31st, thanks to a guy who goes unnoticed, who is known by no one, who was always considered in the department as a kind of oddball, a paper pusher, a drudge. Thanks to him, the detail spoke. We discovered it, a needle in a haystack, that's what it was. And from there, from that detail that we discovered and that you'll discover in the book, an investigation begins. Incredible, really incredible, unimaginable, with unbelievable twists and turns, which will make it possible to catch. After one of the murderers escapes to Switzerland, we'll manage to catch the culprits.
You're actually defending one of them.
I'm defending one of the two accused, and in the end,
they took something, they're in prison.
I imagine they got the sentence that turned into life imprisonment, but they got out.
They pleaded then?
That they pleaded that there was a case of mistaken identity. They were willing to kill someone, but they didn't want to kill a judge.
There's another case you talk about apparently in the book called the Morjoux. What happened in that case?
This case would be ordinary in its horror, of course, if it weren't for the fact that it's the emblematic case that allowed Giselle Halimi, whose name might not mean anything to you, but who was at the forefront of the fight for women's rights, for feminism. She's the one who made it possible for the veil law to be adopted so that abortion would no longer be a crime. Let me remind you that under the Pétain government, an abortion provider was guillotined. Yes, and she helped change the law. I saw a woman in criminal court. I saw her just as I see you now, except it was a woman and not you, obviously, and you haven't committed adultery. She was in criminal court because her husband accused her of cheating on him. Can you believe it? That was in 1974. Women were still being prosecuted for the crime of adultery. A man who caught his wife making love with a lover in their marital home and who killed his wife and her lover was excused. Whereas the opposite wasn't true, so this case, if you will, completely blew up the issue of feminism, and I found myself defending. One of them wasn't convicted for theft, by the way, but was convicted for attempted theft, because luckily for him, he couldn't get it up, so lacking the means, he didn't steal. It's a failure that saved him, in a way, that's it. But the case itself is interesting in the sense that people of your generation should know about it, because it's the case that led to rape being tried by the criminal courts and rapists being convicted. It's the beginning, if you will, of the awareness of how serious an attack on a woman's body really is.
I was wondering, has there ever been a case you defended that, I don't know, traumatized or shocked you or made you sad?
It's nighttime, my poor friend.
Okay.
It's nighttime, the dead return at night, crimes return at night. It's the night that welcomes the ghosts.
Did that happen immediately or gradually as cases passed?
Each case leaves its sediment of horror. You can't come out unscathed from a case like the Solar Temple.
Speaking of somewhat traumatic cases, You also talk about Carpentras. What happened there?
It's the famous story of the desecration of the Carpentras cemetery, which was a mystery. At first, the National Rally, the National Front at the time, was accused, and then it turned out that in the end, the National Front had nothing to do with it. But again, it's a wild story.
What was the case?
A grave was desecrated, well, several graves were desecrated, and more specifically, the grave of an unfortunate man named Germont. The desecrations took place in the Jewish cemetery of Carpentras. So, it was rightly considered an anti-Semitic act, and for political reasons that I explain, that I describe, the Minister of the Interior at the time pointed it out, because it was useful to Mitterrand, who was dropping in the polls. So here we're entering a political version of crime. It was useful to Mitterrand to attack the National Rally, which was uninvolved. That's what the investigation concluded.
For you, what is it that struck you the most in all these horrors you experienced?
You know, it's not a contest of horrors, but each case has its own particular horror, like its own particular smell. When I talk about the murder of old Pierre Michel, when I talk about the desecration of the Carpentras cemetery, when I talk about the rape in Morjoux, when I talk about the unbelievable case, Tangor, that thief who was acquitted after a media campaign and who, after being released, reoffended several times. Well, the Tangor case, what is it? That's another unbelievable case. This is a guy who was convicted of rape. I defended one of the young women who was raped, and I'm sure he's the rapist. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And then, for some reason, public opinion, the Parisian intelligentsia, led by a Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique researcher, became convinced that he was innocent. At the time, Badinter took up his cause. Gisèle Halimi, Simone Signoret, Yves Montand, Marguerite Duras, who is a writer without even knowing the case, all took up his cause.
My client is seen as a liar. She's the only one at that moment who is.
No, there were several women who had been lively. She was the first and main accuser. I come across as the guy who got an innocent man convicted, like a bastard. Besides, the president of the assize court once ran into me and said, "You know, you're the one who got him convicted." I told him, "Don't regret it. He's guilty. Don't be afraid." He said to me, "Yes, but you know, do you realize the press? Wait, you're the one presiding over the assize court, not me."
There are problems at that point, though.
Yes, there are problems. Overwhelming, but he was still pardoned by Mitterrand. Okay, and then 6 months after the pardon, he raped 2 American women. Now, the circumstances in which he stops there, it's like magic, pure magic. If you wrote it in a script, no one would believe it. Because what will allow the police during the second investigation to catch him are 2 completely trivial events, something you wouldn't notice. I can tell you about the first one, but I won't tell you about the second. Go ahead. At the time, to get him pardoned, there was a young woman named Mrs. Tichenet. I'm not sure about the name, but I think it's the person who wrote Not Guilty. Tangor, the rapist, when he was released, had stacks of books in the trunk of his car to distribute. The 2 American women who were raped. At one point, when he opened the trunk of the vehicle, they saw the cover of the book. That's the only clue the police have, the cover of a book called Not Guilty. And they will go through all the bookstores in the area, all of them, for weeks, for months, nothing. No one knows a book called Not Guilty. And then one day they get a call from a bookseller in Marseille who got his hands on a book called Not Guilty, whose cover matches the drawing made by the 2 young women who were raped. It's Luc Tangor, the rapist. So, at the same time, they described the car. They said there were several stickers. The car is green. They find a green vehicle. They find the stickers. He denies it. He completely denies it. They point out the place where it happened. And by an incredible stroke of luck, really incredible, the police are going to find someone who knew Tangor when he was a child and with whom they used to play at the place where the rape happened.
So that confirms that they were very familiar with that cover?
There you go. That shows police investigations sometimes need some luck. But we still pardoned a guy who was able to back out. Wait, he'll be convicted when he's released. The 3rd time, he does it again. What? Yeah, no, yes. And that's the guy we pardoned. And I ended up looking like a bastard in all the press because I supposedly got an innocent man convicted.
And he did it a 3rd time?
And he...
3rd time, what happened?
The 3rd time, it was less serious acts since it was touching, so he was sentenced to 4 or 5 years in prison, and then he got involved in another case, but this time he wasn't convicted because it happened in a pool. They couldn't prove it. I mean, does he really have a problem?
So at some point, did you go back to that in the press? Who did you have?
No, not at all. No, it proves that you can also pardon the guilty.
Was there ever a case you took on where you were sure you could defend it, but in the end you didn't succeed? Or the opposite, maybe you thought it was a lost cause from the start, but in the end you managed to convince the jury? I don't know.
For example, there were times I thought, he won't make it, but I helped him out. I was even very shocked, you know? Yeah, because I thought it was a miscarriage of justice, you know, that he should have been convicted.
In general, what is it? Is that it? You actually find new evidence?
You still see it, well, okay. When for a year, 2 years, 3 years, you regularly spend time with a criminal, you end up noticing things that others don't. Yeah, it's like
Some
reactions. I remember a guy who was accused of stabbing his lover 4 or 5 times. And I managed to get him released before he was tried by the criminal court. And one day we went out for lunch, and it was essential for his defense that he acknowledge his homosexuality. And he didn't want to, because his family was very homophobic, so he didn't want to admit in front of his mother, in front of his sister, that he was homosexual. And one day then, I should remind you that he had been accused of stabbing his victim 5 times. And one day we're at the table and I say to him, but still, if you could acknowledge your homosexuality, everything would make sense, right? Because his lover used to go to Saint-Charles station in Marseille to see prostitutes. So we could explain that it was a crime of passion out of jealousy. Well, so I insist with him. I can still picture the scene. I say to him, but admit it. And then he takes the knife and 4 times in front of me, he stabs the knife, but with terrifying force into the table. He repeats the same gestures of the crime in front of me. I don't need anyone to spell it out. After that, all right, okay? There you go, just as an example.
You're surprised that afterwards you can't sleep, that afterwards it's hard to go out at night because damn, it's crazy. Well, Gilbert, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Is there one last thing that I might not necessarily bring up? Something that was in the book? One last case, I don't know, for example, that might interest people or something like that?
That might interest people. It's that nothing is simple, that's it. Everything is complicated, and we never think enough about the mechanism of crime. The crime can be right in front of you and you might not see it.
Exceptional. Gilbert, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Of course, let me remind you that you can find Gilbert's book, obviously Gilbert Collard, Indefensible Memory, at the top of the description. You can probably find it in bookstores or at Fnac, for example.
Stealing it is possible but not advised.
It's not recommended for Marseille's elected officials. This was Noah in StoryCube. I'll leave an email here if you'd like to join another episode. Have a great evening, Gilbert. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amand. Let me be the one to thank you.
Have a very good evening. Bye.